About a decade ago, when I had just finished my internship here with you all and had finished doing a year of chaplaincy at our local hospitals, I set off to the faraway land of Rochester, New York, where the winters are very, very long. And this time of year, the director of religious education would always say this time of year is when people start getting a little crispy there. So I'm grateful to have sunshine. But the youth group there, I remember I was this very large congregation, and I was on a team of 5 ministers, and part of my portfolio was to work with the youth group. And the youth group would have its annual ritual at the beginning of the year of making a covenant. Many of you are familiar with this ritual. We put a piece of paper on the easel, or we get the whiteboard out, and we just ask, what is the covenant we want to make how do we want to be with each other in this group? How do we want to make sure that we can bring our whole selves here? What agreements, what promises do we need to make one another? And every year in this youth group, the ritual was to make sure that on that covenant was the words, safety third. I don't think they knew what was first or second. They just knew it wasn't safety. Having grown up in a culture that maybe has overemphasized safety, these teens were clear: in order to come alive, in order to be who we want to be in this space, in order to do what we want to do together, safety's on the list, but it's not first or second. How do we have enough safety without too much that stifles us, or too much that stifles others? I'm thinking about safety, of course, in the context of the war happening in Gaza. And I am one who agrees with the point of view that the war Israel is executing is not going to make the people of Israel safer in the long run. That war at this scale only perpetuates further war, further violence. But there is still this fundamental question, I don't know the answer: how do you protect your own sovereignty, whether you're a nation or a person? Your own experience of sovereignty while refusing to invade the sovereignty of another. How do we keep ourselves safe without making anybody else less safe? So I wonder, personally, just individually, interpersonally, what is it that you do? How do you keep yourself safe? Do you, like the professor, know too much? Do you get ahead of things and figure it all out? Or like Smiley was sharing about, do you use something or humor to protect yourself? One of the things I've noticed about myself, when I am afraid for my belonging, when I'm not sure I'm safe in the group, I hide my emotional truth. I bullshit. I hide my emotional truth, and you should know this about me. I have really good bullshit. You like my bullshit. My family likes my bullshit. It's top notch. Because I learned early that this was a good way to keep myself safe, to hide my emotional truth in relationship if I thought it might be dangerous to reveal it. So I smile and nod and pretend I agree with something that I don't really, or at least give the impression that maybe I do, maybe I don't. Pretend to be interested in something I'm not. Pretend to listen when I'm really daydreaming about my own ideas for a book I want to write. And really what it is checking a part of myself at the door, like we were talking about a couple weeks ago. It's hiding behind a mask of safety that keeps me less alive, less connected, less real. And so I'm trying to give it up. Help me out. There's a story I heard on a podcast called Invisibilia several years ago. They're talking about Shell, the oil company, when they were looking at the dangerous level of accidents they were having on their oil rigs. I mean, just huge amounts of injuries and even death that would happen on a routine basis because of how dangerous the work was, right? And the culture was that the men on these rigs, all men, would just hunker down and soldier on and not talk about the impact of seeing their fellow workers maimed and killed on the job. You don't talk about it. That was the unwritten rule. And so out of this masculine bravado, the culture continued until one day, Claire Noir came into the picture. Shell hired Claire, a Holocaust survivor, encounter group aficionado, who began to run some very touchy-feely groups with those oil riggers. And after some initial resistance, the men began to tell their life stories to one another, stories of addiction and illness, of abuse and trauma. They all poured out along with tears. And through this vulnerability, the bravado released its hold on them, and outside of the emotional realm of their own stories, they began to share with one another when they were uncertain in their jobs. Where before they had to maintain that false sense of certainty as a way of staying safe, now they could express when they did not know, ask for help when they needed, and as a result, during the time that Claire Noir was working with the Shell oil riggers, there was an 84% drop in the accidents across Shell. We don't always know what it is. It's not, I don't know who came up with the idea, bring her in, but it probably was not a top executive's corporate plan for how we're going to reduce accidents on our oil rigs. It's not always the immediate, logical, rational idea that will save us. We were talking a little bit about quantum particles. You know a little bit about quantum physics, right? Just, enough that, strange attraction is a phrase you've heard. Me too. We're in the same, I think we're at the same, it's kind of like we all know a little bit about this whole quantum physics thing, but we don't really understand how it works. And I think that's actually kind of like how our emotional processes in groups are. How family systems, the root of how we learn what it means to be a part of a group is. We are, like we were talking about last week, we are not solitary individuals. You can't separate out an individual, partly because last week we were talking about all the parts inside of us, but also because we are built in relationship. We are made up of our relationships. And the way they work is weird. The first time I dropped out of college, I came home and I was in a mental health crisis. I needed my family to be there for me. And as soon as I got home, do you know what the first thing my brother did was? He got sick. And I came to our family therapist who we were seeing, and I pointed it out of like, look, here it is. He can't let the attention, the spotlight be on me even for a moment. And she took that in and told me we weren't going to go there because my brother was not going to understand what I was talking about. But it is weird, and it does happen. We are more connected, our physiology and our emotional relationships, in ways that we can't fully understand. Okay, so what do you know about triangles? How many kinds of triangles are there? Yeah? There we go, isosceles, thank you. Okay, what else we got? Equilateral, isosceles, equilateral, and? Right? And scalene, yeah, that's the one I always forget. Okay, and then the angles that happen in triangles, we learned this, right? Obtuse, acute, good, and yeah, right? Okay, 180. What? Oh, it all had to add up to 180. Oh, good, okay, so we know a lot of rules about triangles. How about Pythagorean theorem? You learned Pythagorean theorem. Yeah, you got it. Okay, how many of you have used Pythagorean theorem since you graduated high school? Oh, that's good. Okay, almost a third of us maybe. I've only maybe once or twice to play role-playing games. Okay, we all learned these geometrical rules of triangles, but I'm guessing that no one here was taught in your high school curriculum about the emotional rules of triangles. Despite the fact that, at least from a family system's perspective, our lives are built from them. You remember Buckminster Fuller talked about the triangle as the most stable shape. And it's true, that's why he had made those geodesic domes like we have up at Freestone out of these triangles. And it's the most stable shape in relationship as well. We will always, when the anxiety between two people is high enough, we'll always find a way to triangle in a third. This was Murray Bowen's theory of family systems. So I've been going to give you a little bit of it today. We'll see. We'll talk about it, I'm sure, in time to come. But Edwin Friedman, who was a rabbi, took his theory and said, oh, this is just how not only do families work that way, all organizations, and especially religious organizations. He said that the family is the true ecumenical experience of all humankind. How we learn to navigate self and other, safety and vulnerability in family is the fundamental human experience, the ecumenical experience of all humankind. And these triangles, they form out of the tension that is inherent between the togetherness force and the individuality force. We're all looking for togetherness, and we're all looking to be ourselves, and that tension forms these triangles. Now, when I mention triangulation, and you might already be going there right now, the response is back off, like there's a poisonous spider in the room. I don't want to be triangulated, right? You don't want to be triangulated. The thing is, you are in a constant state of triangulation. We are born, by being born, you are triangulated. In fact, it happens even before you're born, right? How much do we talk about a baby on the way in our families? All the expectations and hopes, all the pressures, these triangles are the norm. They're the default experience. So we can't avoid being triangulated. What we can, though, do is learn how triangles work. What are the predictable patterns of the emotional processes of triangles? And how do we make choices in response to them? So it's not about learning to avoid them, but better understanding how they work. I'm not expecting anybody to understand these 7 laws, to remember 7 things right now, but I'm going to walk you through them because I think it's such a valuable framework. So Friedman says that the first law of triangles is that the relationship between 2 parts of the triangle is kept in balance by the way that the third part relates to each of their relationships. And in my family growing up, this looked like my brother and I maintained a kind of constant simmer of hostility. It was nearly, unshakable, that constant simmer of hostility. But it very rarely blew up into something bigger because of the way that our mom related to us. Her relationship with each of us and her relationship to our hostility maintained its constant simmer. The second rule is that when you're the third party in a triangle, you can't bring about change for more than a week, Friedman says, by trying to influence the relationship between the other two. Mom, she wanted us to get along so badly She pushed and cajoled. She did everything she knew to get us to get along, but she could not convince either of us to like each other any better. Friedman says it may well be that in the history of our species, no family member, upon trying to correct the perception of another family member about a third, has ever received the response, "You're right, honey. I don't know why I didn't see it that way myself." You can't change the relationship between two other people, no matter how hard you try. Attempts to change the relationship on the other two sides of an emotional triangle, the relationship between the other two parts, are not only generally ineffective, this is the third rule, but actually end up reinforcing the status quo. Because one of the properties of systems, the reason that they exist, these triangles, is to maintain homeostasis, to keep things safe and the same. So in fact, all that pressure that Mom was putting on us to get along, it only helped us dig in our heels and our stances against each other. Fourth, he says the extent that a party to an emotional triangle tries unsuccessfully to change the relationship between the other two, the more likely it is that the third party will wind up holding the stress for the other two. Oh, how it killed my mom that we wouldn't get along. We were actually quite fine with the way things were, my brother and I, more or less, but it was a source of agony for her. The identified issue that brought us back to therapy over and over. And that position, if you're trying to take care of, manage the relationship between the other two in the triangle, they call that the burnout position. Source of burnout for a lot of folks in helping professions. Okay, fifth, the various triangles in an emotional system, they interlock so that efforts to bring change in any one of them is often resisted by the homeostatic forces of the broader system that they exist in. So we're not just in one triangle, we're in a series of interlocking triangles. My brother and I, we neatly divided all of life's activities up between us. He did sports, I did theater. I went to church. He stopped going in third grade, and he studies rocks. When one side of an emotional triangle tends to be more conflictual than the others. But in a healthier system, there's more ability for that conflict to move around. In a less healthy system, it gets stuck. When my life upended at the beginning of the pandemic and I got divorced, my brother moved in with me. And we, a couple of short years later, had gone on amazing camping trips together, traveled internationally, and bought a home together. We can only change a relationship to which we belong is the last rule. And the way to bring about any change is to focus on our relationship with the other two, not theirs. To define those relationships clearly. You know, I think it was too much to expect probably as a kid for me to figure out how to make that relationship with my brother work, with my annoying little brother. But when we're able to take an adult responsibility for our relationships, we find that more choices exist than we may have realized. And the silver nugget, the beautiful gem at the end, Friedman says, is the most triangled position in any set of relationships is always the most vulnerable. But when the laws of triangles, emotional triangles, are understood, it becomes the most powerful. That in the vulnerability lies the power. This is what we're going to wrap our series on masks up with a couple of weeks from now. But this is the paradox of relationships, that the vulnerable becomes the most powerful, that the self, the capacity for self, is developed through relationship. there was a project happening in Marin when I was serving up there to get a new Housing First initiative underway. This was part of Project Home Key happening across the state of California, Housing First. They wanted to put a nursing home, a former nursing home that had been not used for years, 50 homes there, and of course the NIMBY folks showed up to protest, so we were getting involved as a congregation to say, yes, no, we can do this. This is a good idea. But the NIMBY folks came with that idea that putting those people in our community is going to make us less safe. That's what keeps our children safe, is keeping people out. And I fundamentally think it's a mistake. It actually makes us less safe to make that emotional distance. That safety comes through presence and touching the places where there's vulnerability. The scripture tells us, love your neighbor, not once they're clean and sober, not once they've got a job and a proof of income, but love your neighbor as yourself. And so to engage in relationships of justice, it requires us to build capacity for self, to trust that safety is possible through engaging authentically, vulnerably with presence. The logic of the dominant culture tells us that if you stay entangled in these mutual networks of obligation, that will keep you safe. That's what love is. But love as mutual obligation, that's what leads me away from sharing my real truth. And so may we practice instead love as resistance, love as vulnerability, love as becoming real with one another so that more relationships of justice, of newness and possibility may emerge. May it be so. And amen.